Hello everyone, welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification class. Those of you that are standing can please be seated. Welcome all those who are coming in. Here in the state of Texas, if you're watching online, we love to have load shedding out here, so we might lose some power. If we do, we're going to try to continue with class, but that's just become a part of life out here in the state of Texas, so bear with us. We'll keep continuing as much as we can if something does occur, but we're hoping it doesn't. But just so you know, we're going to be in the junior high acceptance unit. Of course, tonight we're going to be starting with chapter 2. But once again, just to remind everyone, if you don't have a book, please, on our Facebook page, if you don't see where it's at, a lot of people are saying they don't see the download section. If you see where the character unit is at, and where you can download there for free, it'll have the word more and an arrow, and you just hit that word more, and it'll give you a drop down. And that's where you can download the acceptance unit. And you can download, of course, it's the teacher's manual, and it's free of charge. And it's very important that you have that. It's very important that you print out a copy for yourself, that you can put notes in. And that way, when you're going back and you're teaching, you'll be able to put all of these things together. And as teachers, you never quit adding notes. You're always going to be adding notes and different ideas that you hear from different teachers. And that's truly what makes us better teachers. Is, as in the Peaceful Solution, where teachers come to class just like students. If you're not a teacher of that class, then you're a student of that class, and there's always something to learn. There's never a time that we don't learn and where we can be a benefit to society. And that's really part of acceptance itself, is realizing that becoming a teacher it means you're a full-time student. You can't be a teacher without being a full-time student, because you're always learning to gather things to offer other people. Well, if you'll be turning over in your acceptance unit to LP2A, that'll be the first grade tabbed page of the second chapter. And once again, LP2A. Now, if you have a student's workbook, none of this information will be in there. All the grade tab pages are only meant for the teacher's manual. That way you'll understand why it's so important. Not only do you have the answers that are in the book, but you also have the information that goes with the instructions the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program gives for the teaching of the curricula itself. So here we have Chapter 2, and it's entitled Accepting Diversity. And of course we have here the note to the teacher, and that's setting the teacher's mind, getting us prepared off of we've just finished Chapter 1, which is accepting me, accepting you, and it gets our mind prepared on what we're getting ready to get into for the second chapter. And always remember, we're building upon not only Chapter 1, but we're building upon all of the previous chapters that we went through in the character unit. And we're going to be putting all of those things together as we move forward. But it says here, starting out with LP 2A, it says, failing to accept the differences in others has led to untold suffering of many innocent people throughout history. So we're talking about people here that have suffered due to no action of their own. They become a victim of circumstance. And it says it is difficult to imagine looking at another living, breathing human being and physically, emotionally, or psychologically abusing them because of the color of their skin, their age, or place of birth. Yet every day, both young and old, are victims of discrimination and prejudice. And it's important to understand that we can become a part of this very easily. And we can look out into society today. You hear a lot about diversity. You hear a lot about diversity in the military. You hear them talking about how taking the time right now, there's discussions about the Navy, the United States Naval branch of military. They're saying that this, speaking of diversity, is leading to them not being prepared to interact in war with another country. But of course, diversity is something that it's a little bit wider than what you hear in the world. The Peaceful Solution goes in a lot more in depth. Diversity in the world, when it's defined, a lot of people will define it as we need to be accepting of all people that accept our ideas. That's how the United States kind of defines it that way. China will define it that way. The Peaceful Solution says that we should be accepting of all people in all ways that do not bring harm to themselves, someone else, or the environment. So if someone is doing something and it brings no harm to themselves, it brings no harm to someone around them, and it brings no harm to the environment, then that should be acceptable for someone to do. But it has to fit into those categories. And of course, you get into many other things when you talk about bringing harm. You could be keep in your mind what we brought out about borrowing something. If you want to borrow something, you have to ask the owner. If you take it without permission, you haven't borrowed, you've stolen. Well, that brings harm to someone. That's not truly teaching acceptance. So it goes in a lot deeper. It's a lot wider, a lot broader in detail. But if we can just base our decisions on, am I bringing harm to myself? Am I bringing harm to someone else? Or am I bringing harm to the environment? And once again, don't focus the environment just on the birds, the trees, the oceans, but also focus it on your community, the community in your school, the community in the city you live, the people you interact with, even the households you live in. And think about those things, because we can very easily discriminate, as we talked about in chapter 1, as youth. And most teachers, when they're teaching it, they're teaching this to teenagers. And we're very knowledgeable that even as we were teenagers, not even looking at the teenagers of today, but looking at ourselves, when we were teenagers, we didn't always want someone to tell us that, no, you can't do that. No, you shouldn't do this. And the first question out of our mouths would always be, why? 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 And have you ever noticed, think about for yourself, when you were asking why, when I was asking why, it wasn't from an educational standpoint, it was more of an argumentative kind of comment. So I wasn't really trying to find out, what's the reason? Is this going to bring harm to me? I wasn't really trying to educate myself. It was more being argumentative. And that's something that this right here will teach us to move past. But this discrimination, this beating, this totally a mutilation of people, and there's no shortage of it. If you go online and just type in examples of discrimination, you will find many stories of people from many years up until this present day, of people that have been brutally beaten, murdered, just untold acts of violence for things that they might have or might not have done. Many examples of people that were mutilated, that come to find out they did not do what they were accused of. I just read a story the other day in the news when we talk about these acts of violence, and you have a society that just doesn't seem to be able to differentiate right from wrong. There was an older gentleman that was accused of sexually assaulting his children. And he was 81 years old, and of course his wife was much younger at 59, and she became so angry when she learned about this that she boiled water on the stove, and then she poured sugar in it to make it hot and sticky. And then as he slept, she poured it all over him. And of course he died. Now, the thing in the article that got me the most was they stressed that they were allegations and they're not for sure if what the woman had been told was true or not. Now, could you imagine if it was true? Does mutilating somebody like that, does that change anything that's already been done? Does that fix previous problems? Part of accepting is realizing that something's broken. This is the best way to move forward. And the best way to move forward is not to bring harm to someone. The best way to move forward is not to bring more pain, more suffering. But the thing that really shocked me, and it takes a little bit to shock me when I read comments, was how many people said that it should have been more gruesome in the comment section. And I was kind of surprised that so many people would think, when you think about what that man went through, and I don't know that I could speak anything against him. When you start thinking about mistakes we've all made, whether we made the one he made or not is not even in question. We've all made bad choices in our lives before. And if a society agrees that we can boil water and mix it with sugar so it's nice, hot, and sticky and pour it on a human being to justify what they had done to people, we're a really messed up society. Because after he's scalded, he's suffered, he's died, you still have children, if he did it, that are still sexually abused. It didn't change the fact. And that's where society has to change to the point to where we're accepting of answers that bring no harm but actually give solutions to problems. And that's where society is kind of lacking, is society today, and I'm speaking from a global standpoint, loves to make decisions based on emotion. And that can be very dangerous, as we'll continue through here in this unit, because emotion can lead to a lot of aggression, because emotion is usually a lack of education and sensible decisions aren't made. Nothing wrong with emotions, but when decisions that affect other lives are based on emotions, that can be a very dangerous thing. So here we're talking about people discriminating and being prejudiced, and it's continuing on here in the middle of the paragraph. It says they are beaten and spat upon, humiliated and demoralized because they are perceived as different. But just how different are we? And we're going to get into that and see how much different are we if we're white, we're black, we're Asian, we're Latino, we're European, African. You know, what difference is there? And really, is there much of a difference at all? And do we accept the facts? Are we more readily to listen to education that's offered in the world that are theory? That are theory of, if you were this skin color, you've always been bred to be a better person. If you're this skin color, you've always been bred to be a lesser person. Now, if you take a group of people and you separate them by color and you bring them all in the same classroom, white, blacks, Latinos, so forth, and you start saying, now you of this color, you've had the best way to go. Society has laid out the golden path for you. Now you, because this color, you have the rough road. You're the one that has been made to where you can't succeed. And when you start saying that, you're teaching that. And remember, we've already covered it, but we're going to cover it some more, and it's in the next paragraph. Hate is something that is taught. Someone is not born to hate. Hatred is something that is taught. And I think most people would agree that there are people in society that have been privileged, but I've seen white presidents in the United States, and I've seen black presidents in the United States. And I think the D or the R in front of their name probably played more of an important role in society in the United States than the color of their skin did, because that's the way society operates. We prejudge people not on the color of their skin, but sometimes by the letter in front of their name. Well, here in the second paragraph, it talks about it as a proven fact that intolerance and hatred are learned behaviors. So this hatred we see in society, there is absolutely no way for us as teachers and also students to change this outcome or this path that we're on without educating people on how not to hate and how to get rid of the intolerance. There has to be a teaching that is in opposition. When I say opposition, a different direction. If you have a wall and the wall is green and you want to paint it orange and you keep painting it with green paint, you're kind of a little bit goofy in the head if you expect it to turn orange one day soon. It just won't work that way. The rules to bringing peace to society is the same way. If we're teaching theories and situational examples that bring forth hatred, if we're dividing people by telling them the color of their skin will guarantee acceptance or a greater pathway in life in general, then we're a society that's creating that. If we don't want to let people advance due to color of skin, then we need to change society. We need to quit teaching there's a superior because of color or because of nationality, because it does kind of break down like a pyramid, color, nationality, and so forth. And of course, you see that when you travel throughout the world. If you're from the United States, there's superiority by saying you're a U.S. citizen. There's also a lot of hatred that comes from it that we've seen for ourselves in traveling with a peaceful solution. We've met some people that didn't like us very much just because we were from the United States. And we tried to talk to them, and they were very easily to talk to, but they already had a perceived mindset that everybody in the United States believes in going into other countries and taking over their country. And that was sad, and we expressed to them that is not our beliefs, and that is not something that we would encourage anyone to do. that we believe peace can only come through education. And, but when you see that for yourself, you can understand why people would believe that. But continuing on here, it says, if children can be taught to hate, they can also be taught to value life and to have compassion for others. And remember values, what that was, and that was on the 6th page of the character unit, and that's teaching how to teach a child to see that all life is important, because remember, that's what a value is. It's something that someone deems to be important to themselves. And we can teach a child that all life has value, not by the color of skin, not by nationality, not by how much money they have, or what the color of their hair is, or if they have one eye that slants a little this way, or if they have something a little short, too tall, a little skinny, a little heavy. These things should not have any differentiation on the respect and the compassion and the concern that's showed to these people, to all people. Well, where does the responsibility fall? Notice here it says, as educators, we have the monumental task of teaching children to value the lives, health, and well-being of every human being, regardless of how different they might be. Someone once said that the highest form of education is tolerance. And remember, we read about what tolerance is. If you'll turn back really quickly, what the Peaceful Solution says about that. It was on page 2. On page 2. And it said, here's something else to consider. Each person is just as important as you are. So, of course, we're going to have to learn to respect ourselves. And I bring that up because we talked about self-concept in chapter 1 and being able to accept ourselves for who we are. And we'll get much deeper into self-respect as we go on, but we need to add a little bit more to this puzzle before we go into too much detail on self-respect. But we're talking about how we see ourselves. Well, we should be able to see ourselves in an important way and others as just as important. Continuing here on page 2, it says this means that as you learn to accept your life as worthwhile, remember that so are the lives of others. This is called tolerance, and it is an important part of acceptance. So tolerance is a very important part of acceptance. If you can't learn to tolerate someone, you'll never be able to work with them. And we'll get into intolerance, and we'll give a couple examples of what intolerance. The word intolerance is used in many different forms and fashion. Of course, we're talking about the intolerance of people, but we'll give different examples as we move forward. But continuing on here on LP2A, it says the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program believes that there are 2 steps toward eradicating the hatred which results in prejudice. And eradicating means we need to get rid of it. You hear about eradicating out here in Texas, boll weevils. They want to eradicate many things out of society. Hate, racism, prejudice, all of those things are negative forms of character. There's nothing positive about teaching hate or teaching someone to degrade someone or teaching someone. We always have in society where they say, don't judge a book by its cover. And then sadly in society, people are taught to judge a book by its cover, or to judge a person by the color of their skin, or to judge a person by their nationality. As you're supposed to be greater if you're an American citizen and this person is a Chinese or a Russian or a Mexican or from El Salvador. You can put any other country in there. To think that you're a better person because you were born in the United States, it's not true. It's not true at all. Where you're born does not make you a better person. It might give you more opportunities, but that doesn't mean we take all the opportunities we're given either. The Peaceful Solution is in 27 different countries right now, and we're always looking to add more countries. And you can be from any country and have positive character. You just have to have someone to teach you. And that's what we're all working towards, is learning this character together, how to have a positive character together. But looking down here, we have A and B. There's these 2 steps we're talking about. And of course, A is looking beyond the superficial difference of others. So looking beyond, what we see to be on the surface. Actually get to know someone. Get to know them for not only who they are, but what they do. Everyone has something that can teach someone else. And of course, we're talking about and encouraging positive things. People can teach a lot of negative things too, but we're emphasizing the positive things. And B here, it says, learning through the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program how to discern and appreciate the character of others, which is at the core of who they really are. And of course, our character, that will really base what kind of interaction we will have with other people. If someone has a negative character, you can try to be around them, but eventually they'll lie, cheat, or steal. Eventually they'll do something that is harmful. But we all have negativity in us we're trying to get out. And that's one thing we have to remember. And you can have someone, or we can ourselves, we can steal don't have to touch our fingers to anything. We tend to think stealing is we take something. But what about when we don't really know a person and we say something negative about a person to someone else, and we steal that person's reputation, and we cause that person not to accept the person that we're speaking bad about? That is another form of stealing that can be very derogatory, and that's what we see in society today. Think about the lack of acceptance we see today, and then as we go through this acceptance unit, think to yourself, why do countries not get along? Why does the United States have so many enemies? And why does Iran have enemies? Why does Syria have enemies? Why does Israel have enemies? You can throw any country into that. Somalia, Sudan, Nigeria, a lot of the oil-rich countries, they have enemies. Just think about why. Why do they have enemies, and what can be done to change that? If you think of the richest country and you think of the poorest country, why would we view the richest country on the face of the earth, why would we view their citizens as more valuable than the poorest country? Why do we have some people that have excess of food to where they dump it in the ocean? And why do we have countries that have almost no food at all, and people are starving to death? Why? When we look at that, we find out that we don't see value in a global scale. We don't accept life for what it is. And whenever you can take a ship of rice and dump it in the ocean, and you have a country starving to death, that's a great sign, or a large sign, not great as in beneficial, but great as in huge, that acceptance is not very predominantly in the minds of leaders when we let people starve, but yet we throw away food. So consider all these things as we move forward here. And we're going to be looking over to LP, page C, LP2, Lesson Plan 2, page C. And of course, the first step in every procedure after 1 is going to be review the previous lesson plan. And of course, the last class we covered the what I have learned, but there's still a few things we want to put back in the minds of the students, and you're constantly reminding them, because repetition is how we learn. And that's, remember the value imitate practice. For it to become a habit, we have to practice, practice, practice. And here in Procedure 1, it says, review the previous lesson, accepting me, accepting you, by asking students the following questions. So there's 3 questions here, and you want to take the time to interact with your students, and you can speak about historical events, or you can speak about events that are presently in society. You can speak about events in your classroom, in your community. Make it real to the students, though, as you're engaging in these conversations, and bring some examples up. With all of the avenues of internet, social media, there's so many ways to get examples, living examples we can see right in front of us. But here, the very first one, what are some of our physical characteristics that are genetically determined? So that's one of your questions, and also challenge them. Where did they learn that in the character unit? Where did that come from? Of course, it repeats it. You can find it on page 1, 5, and 6 in the acceptance unit where it's covering that, but where did they learn it in the character unit? And see if they can tell you. It's the very beginning of chapter 1, but get them involved, engage them, and remind them. Remember, we learned this, and we're adding to it now, so they can continually to build, build, and build. And if you look back to page 1, here in the acceptance unit, and we have the section entitled The Cans and Cannots of Life on page 1. The cans and cannots. So there's some things you can do, and there's some things you can't do. You cannot do. And it says, here's the bottom line. There are things that will be in your life that you will not be able to change, and there are things that you can. When you're able to make distinctions between the two, and focus on what you can change, you will demonstrate acceptance of who you are as a unique person. And when you think about things that people are born with, not due to their own fault, you think of birth defects, or sometimes children might be susceptible to generational disease, things that come down from one generation to the next and they fall victim to those things, or parents that were addicted to drugs, or parents that didn't live very healthy lives at all. Well, the child suffers from that. And when you think about if a child, example that I've seen before, I thought was a great example, the young man told me, what would you like to change if you could? And I didn't know that the young man was legally blind. He could still see, but legally he was blind, so his vision was really bad. He said, I would like to be able to change to be able to see. I would like to know what things look like, just like everybody else does. And when you think about that, you really you realize how much you take for granted that you can actually see things. As you get older and you have to wear glasses, that's a reminder, but it's still, you have the ability to see things. Well, what about people that don't have that ability? You know, there's many people that they live life just fine and they don't have the ability to see things as we do. When they read books, they have to use Braille. They don't readily have every book you would like to have available in Braille. You know, so when you consider these things and you consider what people have and might not have, whether they're born with deformities or so forth, well, we should be thankful that we're okay, but it's very important. You can't look at someone else and go, well, you're not normal, so you're not okay. Because it's very hard to get into our minds that if someone has a defect, if you see, and I've seen a lot of people with certain defects, and I'll be the first one to admit, when you see something that is dramatic, it's hard for it not to pull your attention. And of course, people that have defects in their body, they're used to people doing that to them. It doesn't mean they like it, but they're used to it. But we have to understand that just because they're a victim of circumstance doesn't mean they're not a normal human being. The value of their life is just as equal as someone that has, if you have someone that's missing a leg, their value is just as high as someone that is completely healthy when it comes to life in general, and the things that they should be offered and the respect that they should be given, the respect that they deserve. So it's really important to discuss this where you talk about hair, shape of nose, height, but also have discussions on, well, what if this person didn't have that? And a lot of schools that you'll go to, you'll see that there are people there in wheelchairs. There are people there that are suffering from certain things, and then there's many people that are suffering from things you can't see. So engage, just don't say eye, nose, hair. Engage in conversation with them about these things to get them more interactive and get their minds turning a little bit more about what we're speaking about. Now here in the second question, B, it says, why is it wrong to make fun of the way someone looks, dresses, or speaks? Of course, answers you could receive are because it hurt, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating, upsetting, to be teased and taunting. You know, if you don't have it written there, one of the best sections for that is page 11. Page 11 or 12. It's page 12. Of course, knowledge is power on page 11, being knowledgeable about these things. And if you look down to the last paragraph, we'll go to page 11 first because that's the part that I wanted to get to first. The very last paragraph, it starts out with ironically. Remember, education is supposed to be important. Education is supposed to be something we all work toward. But when I was a youth, wasn't really interested in education. I was more interested in sports. And my mindset with education was, what grade do I have to have so I can play sports? Because if your grades fell down, they took you out of sports. You had to hold a certain GPA. And sadly, once you realize what education is, you'd like to go back and do it all over again, but you don't get a do-over button. You can as you get older, but you don't get to go back and do the things when you had the opportunity. It's kind of missing. But here on page 11, once again, knowledge is power. Ironically, many teens report that youths who are smart are picked on. So youths that apply themselves to education. They're often called nerds and geeks. Hey, as hurtful as those names might be, what is even worse is neglecting your education. And think about the people that are smart, they're studious, and they get picked on for being that way, and they decide to just push it aside. So something that was benefiting them, they get picked on for doing the right thing, and they walk away from it. You know, think about what that does to a society. Always remember, hatred has to be taught. It has to be taught. It is a learned thing. But here on page 12 also, when life hands you lemons, it says, people are faced with challenges, setbacks, and disappointments every day. These adversities can come from a variety of sources. For example, thousands of children every year are subject to physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Others are born with birth defects, and some have learning disabilities because they were exposed to drugs and alcohol before they were born. There are those who are faced with sudden and catastrophic illnesses or accidents. These are just a few of the problems people face within our society. If you have never had experience with these major upheavals, you will certainly be disappointed in one way or another from time to time. Even the daily grind can wear you down unless you are constantly keeping a positive outlook on life. So this daily grind, this if you think back in life, I think most people can. And if you go to schools to teach, you'll always see it. Every place I've been, I've seen something of this sort. We've been a lot of places, and we've always seen something that when I was in middle school, I went to school, my classmate had leukemia. And I didn't know what leukemia was. I learned more about leukemia from him being my classmate in school than I ever learned about leukemia before then. But when the flu was predominant in school, he was always absent. When anybody had a sickness in the classroom, he was always absent. And he never had hair, and his skin was always grayish pale. And then one day we thought he just quit school. But no, he succumbed to leukemia. And they didn't want to tell the students that he was in classroom with that he had died, because they thought that would mentally bother us. But he had missed school so much, it kind of went on for weeks before anybody ever caught on. I guess he's not coming back. But, you look at that, and I don't remember anyone picking on him, and I think a lot of people would stood up for him. But in society, there are people that are picked on. And people don't understand what they're going through when they're picked on, but they do that. And of course, when you get someone, imagine someone that's going through something like that in life. So they have cancer, they're fighting cancer. Cancer, sad to say, can be a losing battle 99.999% of the time. When you think it's gone, it comes back. And then they're already battling with that, and then here comes someone picking on them. Or imagine someone that has another defect that is not readily seen, but they're being picked on, and they know what their defect is. And they're being picked on, and they know why they're suffering, but they don't want everybody else to know. Well, think about what we could do if we would just change the outlook of treating people that way. If we could just accept people as valuable as ourselves. And first, seeing ourselves as valuable. Well, see here, this is another question, the last question you want to interact with your students before continuing on here to chapter 2. It says, how should we treat others? And notice here it says the answer should be, this is an idea of the peaceful solution given the teacher what to look for in the answers. And it says we should treat others as we would want to be treated, with care and concern and respect. And of course, we're going to get into that. Care, consideration, and concern is respect. And you can put a note there. We'll eventually get to it. But it's never too late to know that everyone deserves respect. And we've mentioned that when teaching the character unit. No one has to earn someone else's respect. Respect is deserved by all people. And that's part of acceptance. That's part of seeing the value of someone. That's part of accepting everybody else as important as ourselves. And that would help get rid of selfishness. The let me put myself first. Well, as long as I'm taken care of, then everything else can fall by the wayside. No, that's actually making sure everyone is taken care of equally. It's kind of like when, your mom would give you a piece of cake and you had to share it with your brother and she let you cut it. And you'd always cut one big piece and one small piece, and then she would give the big piece to him. And you realize you just hurt yourself by cutting it. If you'd have cut it equally, you would have got more. but you had to learn the hard way. She let you cut it, then let him choose. And of course you lose out. But when we accept each other as valuable, everything breaks down the right way. Well, here in LP2C, in Procedure 2, this is the start of the lesson plan itself. This is what the teacher needs to do after having a conversation with the 3 questions we've talked about. And once again, don't just go through the questions, engage them in conversation. Procedure 2, it says, tell students that they will learn more about the importance of accepting the diversity of others. Explain that they will learn that that intolerance, the opposite of acceptance, has led to hatred, conflict, and wars. Now, when you tell them that, also remember as a teacher, these things have to be taught. Hatred is taught. Person isn't born hating someone. It has to be taught. So this intolerance, which is the opposite of acceptance, it leads to hatred, conflict, and wars. Those things have to be taught to people. So as teachers, we realize that if we have students that are intolerant, they've been taught to be that way. If they had hatred, they've been taught to be that way. We have to teach them a new way, a new path. So it says, stress that the world contains, and you can tell in 20 years the world has picked up. So you see that 6 billion, you can go ahead and underline that, put 8 billion. We've kind of come up a little bit since the book was written. We're right at 8 billion people now. People with many different cultures and beliefs. And beliefs doesn't always mean religious beliefs. People can have different beliefs in different things. We tend to think beliefs are always religious, but not just speaking of religious beliefs in this. People can have, some people believe President Trump would be a better president than President Biden. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with politics. Some people believe that winter is better than summer. I personally like summer better than winter. Doesn't make me right, just I prefer that. So we have different beliefs in different circumstances. But it is imperative, notice, that each individual learns to appreciate, respect, and value the uniqueness. Now, the uniqueness means the quality of being one of a kind. You stand out. You're who you're supposed to be. You're what you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be like everybody else as far as the looks. We're supposed to have our own personality. Character is something we should all have in common, and that's what we're working toward, but uniqueness. And of course, of every person on our planet, every person is unique, just like a fingerprint. Everybody has a different fingerprint. Even identical twins will have different fingerprints. Now, without the respect and understanding that acceptance brings, and notice acceptance brings respect and the understanding of that. That's why it's important that we have to go through learning what acceptance is before we can gather the respect in. We will continue to live in a world where people are mistreated because of superficial differences. Have students turn in their handbook to page 23 and read and discuss the introduction. One thing you can do here while you turn over to page 23, and we'll start Procedure 2, without being controversial, ask students, try to see what's in their mind. Try to see what's been teaching them. And ask a student, ask a classroom full of students. And keep in mind, you'll be very diversified. We've been to schools where we've seen students wearing hijabs. We've been to, obviously, we've seen Arabic, Muslim, Jewish, about every different religion you could think of. We've seen it in schools. And I would think the most diverse school I've ever been to is probably Central High in Little Rock. They had a plethora of many different beliefs, religions, cultures, and who would have thought you would have found it in Little Rock, Arkansas? But very diversified there as far as people. But acceptance, well, that was a different story. That's not quite as prevalent. And it's a challenge when you have young people with that much diversity in a school as far as people from different backgrounds. But this diversity here, Chapter 2, Accepting Diversity, at the very top of the page you see that prejudice stems from ignorance. And ignorance comes from a lack of education, from a lack of understanding or being taught the proper way. And here on page 23, Chapter 2, Accepting Diversity, the introduction. It says, look around you. Notice that no two people are exactly alike. Even twins might be physically identical can have character and personality traits that are completely opposite. The next time you watch TV or go to the park or mall, notice the many different types of people there are. In addition to our physical differences, we also have different cultures and values. And that's something that you can see from one aspect to the next aspect of people from different areas of society. Values upon, these things, cell phones. I've been to countries to where I don't even know if they have them. I mean, I've seen people use them, and I know I had phone service, but as Americans, we were always like this. We were sitting, waiting for the plane. We were waiting for our next appointment. We were on our phones. We looked around, and this was in Argentina, and we realized we're the only ones on our phones. No one else is on their phone. And everybody was looking at us like, those poor guys need a life. They can't put that phone down to save their life. And I tend to think they were right, because one thing that I'll tell you in Argentina that I thought was really interesting. Now, of course, there were people that were really poor there. But one thing, between 11 and 2, they had what is called siesta. And when they shut down for their work, everybody went to the city parks. And they had a lot of city parks, and they were huge. And they would just go there, and they'd spend time with their family. And that's what they did. They would sit there at the city parks on a blanket, on a big tree stump. The trees were enormous there, and they would just spend time. And you would see different groups, and they were with their families, and then they'd go back to work. And I thought, that's very interesting. There's a lot can be learned from what they're doing there. Now, not everybody. You shut down here in the United States from 11 to 2 or from 12 to 2, and you probably get a lot of nasty notes on your door because that's not a part of our culture. Down there, it was a part of their culture, and I thought that was really interesting, that not what they did, but also how they did it and how they made the best with what they had. And they looked like they were thoroughly enjoying it. You don't miss something you've never had. And the things that you have, when you learn to use it to its utmost ability, you learn to enjoy the very basics of life. Well, continuing on here, it says, as you learned from the previous chapter, and that's the accepting me, accepting you, the chapter 1 of the acceptance unit, people do not choose their physical characteristics or where they were born. What we can choose, however, is to accept and value each person as a unique human being who deserves to be treated with respect, compassion, and empathy. And that's something that's, when we talked about that empathy, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, and also compassion. If you want to put a note there, that was on page 13 of Accepting Others. And the little black box over to the side, we had the definition of consideration and empathy. And in that section, we also explained that empathy is like putting yourself in someone else's shoes, or like it says, walk a mile in my steps, or my path, so to speak. And that's what we should think about, because every person has been through different situations in their lives or different battles they have had to fight. When I say fight, I mean to overcome, to endure, to try to right the wrong, so to speak. And we all have those things that we have to get through in life. And we need to, once again, see that we all have this battle together, but not battle of guns and knives and ships, battle of educating ourselves to learn how to break the cycle of hatred and war. So continuing on here, it says, the third paragraph, it says, let's go to the second paragraph here. Immoral negative character should always be discouraged. So immoral negative character should always be discouraged. And by saying discouraged, it means when someone makes a negative choice, when someone does something that's immoral, sometimes depending on the setting, it's best to pull them aside and explain to them, listen, what you did can cause harm to yourself, someone else, or the environment. Explain the harm that it could bring, and then show them why it's necessary to not make that choice again. Sometimes it has to be done in a setting of a group. If you have a group of people that make a decision that is harmful, then it's best to explain it to the group. If it's individualized, it's best to take them aside. But once again, you have to engage them and offer. You just can't say, don't do that. We like to say that in life, but sometimes in education, we have to offer a little bit more than don't do that. You know, we had the just say no to drugs. It didn't work. Didn't work at all. Just Say No campaign, I remember that came out when I was in middle school and high school. They had those posters everywhere. They had their programs everywhere. They played a kind of a public announcement every day at school. And I seen a lot of people doing drugs, and they could have hardly cared less about Just Say No. That was nothing to them. Just Say No wasn't enough, but once they seen how, oh, I guess you can overdose from these things, that was a little different. And then they started bringing educational films into the school to try to help back it up, because they realized just saying it wasn't enough, putting it to be part of the curriculum, put it as part of the education, teach people why you need to say no. Well, continuing on here, it says, if they display negative moral traits, those traits should be rejected and the behavior pointed out. Now, by saying rejected, we're talking about through an educational standpoint, and remember, as a teacher, we do it with kindness and instruction. Sometimes emotion can get the best of us, but once again, never let something that can bring harm to someone else in your classroom, never let that slide, even if that means you have to set aside a different time to speak with that person, or even bring counselors in from the school to help that person. Never overlook something that can bring harm. It has to be addressed. That doesn't mean a person has to be mutilated as far as character, but they have to be addressed. No person should be rejected, continuing here, should be rejected because of physical characteristics. During the course of history, wars have been fought because of a lack of acceptance of people who were physically different. What causes people to mistreat and hate one another because of their physical and ethnic differences? So when you think about that, ask them things that have occurred in history. Ask them about the Holocaust. Ask them about, there's a lot of brutalization, a lot of slaughtering that takes place in Africa. There's a lot of things where you have in the Middle East between the Sunnis and the Shiite. You have hatred just because of tribal regions. There's a lot of different areas that you can bring up and show how it's never benefited anyone, these differences that people have, and then see if you can find what the differences truly are. I've asked people from the Middle East before who were Sunni, and I asked, why do you not like the Shiite? I don't know. I've asked a Palestinian before, why do you not like Israelis? I don't know, but I don't like them. Well, because they've been taught. Because they've been taught to not like the others. Well, why were they taught to not like the others? Because the generations before that were taught to not like them. And something bad has occurred. So the teaching of, okay, don't like them now because they did something to us. The next generation, okay, no, don't like them now because they did something to us now. And it's this retaliation. And it's this teaching of hatred. Can you bring peace to all of these places? And the most common place everybody talks about, the greatest challenge, is the Middle East. Once you bring an answer to the differences, once you eliminate the emotion and base everything on positive character, you can bring peace to any area. Any area can have peace brought to it. And when someone says it won't work, ask them why. And ask them who's done it so we know it don't work. Because it hasn't been done. Usually things involve money and the taking or giving of land and people giving up things. Why can people not just see the value of people? And when someone tells you, well, it just won't work, ask them who did it and prove that it didn't work. We've proven a lot of other things don't work. So, test your students' minds. Ask them. You always want those gears to turning. And a lot of students can come up with really interesting examples. And then, of course, here it says, can we learn to coexist? And those are really popular bumper stickers that you see. We always have students bring those up in school because they realize the coexist is made up of different religious symbols. That's not what we're speaking about. We're talking about coexist, living as human beings on this planet Earth. So can we coexist and respect each other, or will our differences continue to cause conflict, hatred, and war? Well, that's a question for them to be asked, for us to ask ourselves even. How do we fix it? Well, you have to eliminate the problem. Easier said than done, but it's possible. In this chapter, we will explore these questions and more. You will learn that accepting others, looking past what makes us different, and focusing on our similarities will lead us to a place called appreciation and respect. We can actually learn to appreciate others and to respect others. Now, looking back to our lesson plan here, that was procedure 2. That was procedure 2. And we're going to be moving on to procedure 3. So we're on LP2D, lesson plan 2, page D. And notice it starts out with ask students to turn in their handbook to page 24 and read the section entitled An Equation of Hate. Discuss the meaning of the words intolerance, superiority, racism, and discrimination. And of course, those definitions will be given for you to discuss. And it says, emphasize that these words exist as part of our vocabulary because of a lack of acceptance for those who perceived as being different. Stress that an intolerant attitude is learned. So once again, it's something that has to be taught. Hate is an attitude we learn, and intolerance is derived from fear and a false sense of superiority. So superiority there is a false sense of it. And turning over to page 24, and this is a great place when you come up with this right here. This is a great place. Keep in mind you have children from many different areas of life, parents from many different cultures, many different countries. So you have to be careful about how you address this. But you kind of want to, their students are going to talk about it and they're going to have opinions no matter what you do, and it's a great place to address it to where you can correct it. When you turn over to page 24 and you see the equation here of hate, and it says read the following and become familiar with their definitions, ask students who are Americans, if you're in America, ask them, what country do you fear the most? And when they give a country, and I don't know what country they would say, I've heard quite a few different, when we ask, the next question is why? Why do you fear them? They really don't have answers. A lot of it goes, look, the news says they're going to kill us. Have they ever attacked anyone? You know, it's always fun to get a child's mind going when they, I'm afraid of China. How many nations has China attacked in its history? And see if they can figure, if they can't answer it, well, go look that up. Find out, see, how many nations has China attacked? Then, of course, now we get into cyber warfare. We get into economical stances that take place, which have become much easier. And that kind of complicates the equation a little bit as far as getting the facts to it. But when we look at other countries, the reason we fear each other is because countries don't trust each other. Countries have used and abused. Countries have not accepted each other for who they are and the benefit they can be to society, and that's caused distrust. And everybody wants to get the upper hand on someone else. So looking here to this word intolerance, it says, the definition here underneath it in italicized letters, it says, unwilling to accept any person and unwilling to help them overcome the things that are not beneficial. You know, one thing that we all have to acknowledge, it doesn't matter what country we come from, what city we come from, state we come from, community, we all have things that we need to improve. We all have things that need to be more beneficial in our life. And when you think of intolerance and how an intolerant attitude, how it affects society, think of someone who's lactose intolerant or someone who's allergic to nuts, so to speak, you know, the eating of nuts. And then let them take that into their body. If you're lactose intolerant and you drink something that has lactose or eat something that has lactose, your body has a very harsh reaction to what you've just put in it. And there's nothing you can do. You have to let it cycle through your body and it will work its way out. And once it's worked its way out, you're back to where you can start feeling healthy again. An intolerant attitude in society is the exact same way. Once that's allowed in, it has to be processed out, or education has to be offered so it can be phased back out again. If you keep putting the intolerance in, you're going to keep suffering the same effects of what it does to the body. You're going to see that in society. But once through education, the intolerance is removed, the body or the community can be healthy again. And that's what the Peaceful Solution is offering here, is this education of how to remove the intolerance. And of course, it's not an easy job, and it's something that we all have to work on, but through this curricula, it's proven it can be done. The next one here, we have intolerance plus inconsiderate. Now, inconsiderate means displaying a lack of thoughtful concern for others. And, we think of being inconsiderate when you don't hold a door open for someone or you don't say thank you to someone. But whenever we just expect people to do something for us and we don't give second thought, well, they should do it. That's their job. What if they're not there to do that job? We have to see the value. When you see the value in a person, it's not just them as a human being, as living and there they're sitting. It's also in the job they're doing. As a teacher, you have to be considerate of your students. If you don't have students, you're not going to be much of a teacher. And if your students aren't engaging with you, it can be frustrating as a teacher. Well, when society is inconsiderate and they don't see the value, they don't show the thoughtfulness. And when we say thoughtful, well, what can a thought? The lack of being thought, the thought of concern. Remember all the way back to the character unit. Thoughts lead to feelings and feelings lead to actions. When we are thoughtful and thankful that someone does something or someone's doing something, we're really more accepting of taking that person in and seeing them beneficial. When they repave the roads in your community, you're very thankful. When the roads fall apart in your community, you'll complain. That's just part of us as Americans. We will complain over the smallest potholes, and then you go to other countries and you come back and you think, well, my car didn't fall in this pothole. This is okay. I've seen potholes the whole front of the car can go down into, and I think, wow, life's pretty decent back where I just came from. Yeah, the roads are pretty nice. But sometimes we can be inconsiderate by, just complaining about something doesn't fix the problem. We have to find out how can we be part of the solution. Well, also here we have, notice we have the intolerance plus the inconsiderate, being inconsiderate. Then we have racism. And that means the mistreatment of a group due to nationality or ethnicity. Now, racism here in America, of course, due to the Civil War and the days of Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Act, we think of black and white. Racism is much, much deeper than black and white. And on today's level and scale of society, I think it's more easily seen that racism has many different faces. It has many different avenues of accessing society, and none of them are positive. And I'll repeat that once again. No form of racism is positive. Racism is where one group or individual sees himself more valuable than the other individual due to color of skin, country of origin, or religious belief. We've already established we have to see each other with the same value. We can't look down at people. That is not being accepting. And when we have that racism and we put it in through what we're doing by labeling people, notice we have discrimination here. And that means the treatment or consideration based on class or category rather than individual merit, partially or prejudice. When you think about discrimination, that also goes, it does not identified by color. If you have a person that, oh, this person's wealthy, I think I'll let them do it. And another person comes through and that person doesn't look as wealthy. Nah, I don't think I'll let them do that. We can discriminate in very harsh ways because sometimes we perceive people to be wealthy or poor, and that's not necessarily the case. I've experienced where a lady come into my store one time and in my furniture store that I have, and she was dressed really bad as far as holes all in her clothes, and I felt sorry for her. And I was helping her and assisting her, and she had this huge order she wanted to do, and I'm thinking, I guess I can spend the time to listen to her, but I think she's going to waste all my time. And I spent like 2 hours with this lady. And she finally said, well, if you can come pick up everything, that would be great. So I got her address, and I'm sitting here thinking, I've never been to that part of town before. And when I went, she had a house that took up almost half a city block, and I found out she owned the largest carpet store in West Texas. She just dressed that way because she said people treat her better when she dresses that way when she's shopping, because her price goes up when she dresses nice. And I thought, well, that's pretty smart. The price wouldn't have went up with me, but I honestly thought, I told her, I said, I honestly thought you were pulling my leg. I thought you were going to bring me to a place of nothing. And she ended up being a really decent customer, and she ended up being a friend of someone I knew really well that guided me in business. Had no idea, but she reminded me of the man that guides me in business that got me started out. She reminded me of him a lot. Very smart in how to deal with society and how to get people to see you for more than what you actually are or have. Show value. Get people to value. But notice when you put these things together, you have hate. And hate is an intense hostility or an extreme dislike. And one thing you know in life, the only thing that you should have a hatred for is something that brings harm to someone else, yourself, or the environment. And when I say hatred, I don't mean the hatred of going out and beating it with a stick. Hatred means the desire to educate, to remove this way of life. Education is the only way it can take place, and that's what we have to work on. And here at the very bottom it says, notice it says, these words are part of our vocabulary because of a lack of acceptance. So these words can be used to identify things we need to get rid of. There's nothing that we read that is beneficial, but everything needs to be removed. So we're going to stop right there at that point on page 24. The next teacher will pick up with procedure 4, and they'll begin on page 25, and we'll start talking about how intolerance hurts, and we'll get into more of everyday life and how it shows up in everyday life. The next class will be on 7/18 at 5:30 p.m. So thank you once again for joining us, and we appreciate you coming.